Hi, I'm Julia, and I'm assuming that everybody watching this has seen or heard this in some form the past few years.
This is one of the movies based on the book 1984.
1984. At this point, it's as if 1984 is just the instruction manual.
But this is sending a chilling message to free speech, and it's everything that the book 1984 was talking about, so I am not surprised.
You guys think I'm joking? This lyric from Tom MacDonald exists.
George Orwell, 1984 was his last lecture. George called them thought police, now we call them fact checkers.
1984 has reemerged the past decade against the backdrop of the US political climate and to some greater extent the political climate of the world. And it would seem that the message of the book is clear. It's a socialist critique of contemporary totalitarian faux socialist governments. So like the Soviet Union. Yeah, time and time again, I read about somebody getting banned off Twitter and then somebody claiming that's 1984. I see a political cartoon of Bill Gates, once again claiming Bill Gates is Big Brother, and then I see something like this.
Government surveillance trying to catch you, they don't ask questions. Mass incarceration equals capital for cash investors.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't help myself. The problem with 1984 isn't the book itself. The problem lies in the misinterpretation or outright ignorance of key thematic ideas which Orwell wanted the reader to discover. My two guiding research questions for this was as follows. In what ways are 1984's thematic messages distorted or altogether missed by modern-day conservatives? And how can the thematic ideas from the book be applied to both the Democrats and Republicans, respectively? I'm Julia, and this is a problem with 1984. George Orwell was born Eric Arthur Blair in Imperial India. He grew up like a normal British kid, he went to college, etc., and then he went to Burma as an Imperial police officer. While in Burma, Blair started to open his mind and embrace certain aspects of Burmese culture, with him later regretting he didn't do more. Eventually, he resigned from his position as Imperial police officer, and he started his career as a writer, writing under the pen name George Orwell. His first few books were autobiographical in nature, inspired by his adventures in Burma, but the further he got into his writing career, the more involved he became in the outside world. For example, he stripped himself and lived among London and Paris's poor to understand their way of life, and he even fought in the Spanish Civil War, which was cut short by a bullet that hit his neck. The latter experience specifically was a catalyst for Orwell's politics. This was a Spanish Republican socialism where everyone was united in a common cause and classes had ceased to exist. In his memoir, Homage to Catalonia, he writes about what he observed about day-to-day life in Aragon where he was stationed.
Up here in Aragon, one was among tens of thousands of people, mainly though not entirely of working class origin, all living at the same level and mingling on terms of equality. In theory, it was perfect equality, and even in practice, it was not far from it.
While Orwell admits that this period of true equality was only a temporary stage in the war, he also notes how this version of socialism is far different than Soviet socialism when he states,
"In every country in the world, a huge tribe of party hacks and sleek little professors are busy proving that socialism means no more than a planned state capitalism with a grab motive left intact. But fortunately, there also exists a vision of socialism quite different from this."
Orwell hoped to promote this theory in England through his various publishers, yet even 70 years after his death, the same people quoting this
1984
are the same people quoting this.
I would tell them that the socialism in Scandinavia, that success story, is a complete and utter myth.
One of the most serious challenges our countries face is the specter of socialism.
Orwell's intent with this novel was to create an exaggerated version of a totalitarian society based on the fascism he observed in Germany and Italy and the communism he observed in the Soviet Union. While yes, fascism and communism are on opposite sides of the political spectrum, what Orwell observed in the Soviet Union was a distorted form of socialism known as communism, where Stalin was the head honcho of a small group of people which ruled over the general working class under the guise of comradeship. So it's this political climate which established the stage for 1984. Those governments mainly referencing the Soviet Union. Orwell also wrote Animal Farm, which is a more in-depth Russian allegory, and it's more direct, it's short. It's a good read. You should read Animal Farm, or at least watch the animated movie. Do either one, I'm not your mom. But yeah, there's a lot of Russian symbolism throughout 1984. Emanuel Goldstein, who's a traitor to Oceania, is supposed to represent Leon Trotsky, a founder of the Socialist Soviet Union, who was later exiled and assassinated. Another example would be the Thought Police, representing the Russian NKVD, which in essence was a secret police whose main job was to suppress any revolutionary activities and just basically kill anybody who disagreed with the state. It happened all over Eastern Europe after Orwell's death, not just Russia. At any rate, 1984 was heavily shaped by Orwell's personal experiences and political leanings coming out of the Spanish Civil War. So with all of that, what exactly does 1984 warn of? Quite a few things, actually. The book deals with the death of art and scientific progress in totalitarian states, as well as sex being a major motif throughout the story, which is ultimately revealed to be used by the government to control its citizens' emotions. Power is also a huge theme, with a big question throughout the novel being, why power? So the pursuit of power is for power itself. It's paradoxical, but it makes sense, trust me. Almost all of the conservatives that go after 1984 never go after themes regarding government control of language, like with Newspeak, or government surveillance, like with the telescreens. Practically everything that's compared with Orwell has to do with the suppression of free speech. Orwell's main theme regarding suppression of free speech and thought control revolved around this central idea. Totalitarian governments use propaganda, secret police, and the outlawing of free thought to keep a population that is either ignorant or completely in line with their party's ideology. Let's break this down. First off, propaganda. Propaganda, simply put, is just a means by which information is pushed onto an audience. While the word was stigmatized for the way it was used throughout history, it's not inherently evil. Advertisements, for example, use propaganda in the form of testimonials. Political ads use smear campaigns, which tarnish another opponent's reputation. And I'm not a sociologist, but I'm pretty sure that all the crowds cheering "Make America Great Again" and "Build the Wall" is a form of propaganda, just as all those signs outside of multi-million-dollar homes that say science is real are also forms of propaganda. Simply put, propaganda is around us in all different kinds of ways. We just don't realize it. And once again, while propaganda is not always a bad thing, it was used throughout history by different dictatorships to exercise power. In Nazi Germany, for example, while a general feeling of anti-Semitism lingered throughout all of Europe's history, anti-Semitic propaganda like cartoons or newspapers were ramped up throughout the decade prior to the Holocaust, which allowed for Hitler's mass extermination of Jews to be met with relatively little opposition from within. 1984's propaganda functions in a very similar way. The Inner Party in 1984 uses propaganda in the form of telescreens, which constantly praise Big Brother and constantly lie to Oceania's people about how chocolate rations have improved or the country is doing better in the war, where it's not true, as Winston obviously knows. Now, while this is the most direct example of totalitarian propaganda, another example would be the 2 minutes of hate, where everyone says bad words at Emanuel Goldstein. Propaganda is also implemented throughout the use of doublethink, which is basically the government implementing its own version of reality in place of what actually happened. For example, 2 plus 2 is obviously 4, but if the party says it's 5, then 2 plus 2 is 5. Whatever resistance to propaganda there is, it usually lies in the minority like Winston, who's eventually captured and crushed by the government. The ways in which Orwell used propaganda in 1984 was meant to signify how totalitarian governments are effective in brainwashing their citizens. It satirized many examples of communist propaganda in the Soviet Union, for example, by exaggerating them to a larger degree. Big Brother's face is on the poster just like Stalin's was. The only difference is that he's always watching you. The Thought Police, or the secret police, I should rather call them, is a direct callback to Germany's Gestapo and Stalin's NKVD. In 1984, Winston's caught by members of Thought Police, who poses as a shopkeeper before turning him in. The Thought Police itself isn't the main evil, nor is it what conservatives compare our society to. 1984 doesn't pull any punches and exaggerates everything in totalitarianism, including free speech. At the time of the Soviet Union, free speech was obviously really limited, with the NKVD dealing any opponents to the state, as was seen with Trotsky, and you know what happened to Trotsky in Mexico. A majority of the Russian working class had some form of opposition to the ruling class, even if they couldn't vocalize it. In Oceania, there's no freedom of speech, but there's also no freedom of thought, as the government's working hard to completely remove it, as seen with Winston. And this major thematic point is where the large disconnect is. Take the case of Donald Trump, who got banned off Twitter after inciting the Capitol riots. He got banned for, shall I say, obvious reasons. And following the ban, his son tweeted this: "We are living in Orwell's 1984. Free speech no longer exists in America. It died with big tech, and what's left is only there for a chosen few. This is absolute insanity." I think what's more insane is the fact that you can tweet that and expect people to believe that you actually read 1984, because, spoiler, you probably didn't. In the United States, free speech laws extend to everyone with certain stipulations, such as slander and libel laws. But aside from that, you can say practically anything you want as long as you have a platform and it doesn't endanger anybody. The catch is, when you sign up for a platform like Twitter, you sign an agreement stating that they can ban you provided they have reason. After all, Twitter's a privately owned company. The USA is a capitalist country, which means that there are privately owned companies inside the USA. Economics 101 with Juliet. So if Twitter determines that you've broken one of their rules, which Trump did in this case, they have every single right to ban you, and it's not limiting of free speech. Honestly, here's the main question that can be asked and answered with an easy yes or no. Is the government restricting free speech in this scenario? No, it's not 1984. A privately owned company, which had the rights to do so, banned you. And in ways, this is tone deaf to actual examples of totalitarianism like in North Korea. And this doesn't extend to Trump only. Earlier in February, former New York Congressman Mario Frota was banned off the platform for tweeting a meme that implied that transgender and non-binary people are mentally ill. We're literally pretending that certain people are certain things, and if you don't hold that belief, you're considered hateful or a bigot. It's just bizarre to me, because obviously I think it's a very valid opinion, and I wasn't encouraging violence or hate or anything. You know, despite the fact that he called them mentally ill. Look, I'll be completely honest. I even have trouble sometimes grasping the whole concept of being non-binary, and I'm a trans woman. But just because I don't fully understand it doesn't mean I shouldn't respect their pronouns and how they choose to be addressed, much less literally call them mentally ill. I think that the best part about this is that he continued by saying, if I can't be on Twitter and get anybody to see what I'm saying, and I can't be on Facebook, and I don't own a television network or radio station, then there's nowhere for me to get my views out there without literally standing on a soapbox somewhere. Yeah, that's kind of the whole point of free speech. Nobody's stopping you from going out on a soapbox and shouting your own opinions. Nobody's stopping you from joining Parler or creating your own social media service to put your memes out. This isn't a case of free speech. It's a case of a privately owned business exercising its rights over users who break their agreements. Think that a privately owned business company would understand how free speech works. For example, Simon & Schuster, how do you say that? Is that Schuster? Simon & Schuster canceled Josh Hawley's book deal after his participation in the January 6th riots, with Hawley going on to insist that it was Orwellian and a direct attack on his freedom of speech. The only thing with that is that the government isn't limiting what you can say. You can write all day about how awful Democrats are, and provided you self-publish or find a publisher who will do it for you, then great. But a company like Simon & Schuster refusing to publish your book isn't the same thing as the government restricting your right to say things. As a matter of fact, you're literally in government. What are you doing? Okay, so my camera just died. I'm in the final stretch. I just want to finish this so I can eat lunch. So here goes. Camera angle B. Woo. Look, I feel like that should go without saying, but I'm not making Orwell a fervent ally of the modern Democrat platform or anything. Yes, he was a socialist, but when you compare modern Democrat Party values to his values, a majority of the Democrat Party skews to the right, and even people like Bernie Sanders, well, yes, they're socialists, are very, very, very slightly left. Simply put, on the world stage, the Republican Party is far right, and the US Democrat Party is moderately right. So while I'm personally a leftist, I'm not necessarily an adherent of everything the Democratic Party has to say because it has so many flaws, just like the Republican Party does. And the reason I say this is just so I can be reasonable here. Orwell's message with 1984 was to warn of the various ways in which a government can become totalitarian, and the book itself was pro-socialist, anti-totalitarian propaganda. Winston himself says throughout the novel, if there's hope, it lies in the proles, which is shorthand for the proletarian class, the only class capable of revolting and overthrowing the government. The US is far from totalitarianism because of our comprehensive Republican democracy and all the checks and balances in our government. Now, is the system deeply flawed? Yes, gerrymandering being an example. But 1984 just isn't applicable to the United States today. The government isn't spying on every single person at all times. We're not being sent to a rehabilitation center to correct our thoughts. The same can be said, though, about North Korea, China, or even Russia to some extent. At the end of the day, 1984 just circles back to context and purpose. What Orwell was warning against was an Eurasian expansion of totalitarianism as he observed in the Soviet Union. If we want to take these themes to heart, we can still observe these countries and hope that change comes in our lifetime. And to anybody who's Republican and who's made it this far, then I sincerely applaud you for sticking through and just hearing another point of view. I may not see eye to eye with you on all issues, but we can still at least treat each other like humans. Anyway, that's a video for today. I ruined my voice again. It sounds like I just swallowed a pack of cigarettes. I'm gonna go take a nap now and see you guys in a month. Bye!